Welcome, everyone, to WitchyCatLady's Tales by Fireside. Those Who Live in the Woods by Darcy Coates. Tessa flipped her sleeping bag out of its holder and laid it beside Karen's. They had only a two-person tent with barely enough room for their bags. Once Belle arrived, they would be like sardines in a can. Not that she minded. They'd been through worse on their annual long weekend camping adventures, including one trip where their tent had been blown away and they'd had to sleep outdoors for 2 nights before making it back to civilization. She poked her head out of the tent to see Karen sitting beside the fire, turning sausages on the skillet. "How are they doing?" she asked. "Just about there." Karen was leaning so close to the flame that the flickering light seemed to make her face glow. She had the excited, almost manic smile she always wore whenever they started on their hikes. Even though the parking lot was only 20 meters behind them, she was glad to be among nature again. "Should be done by the time Fel gets here." Tessa checked her watch. She really should have been here by now, unless her boss made her stay late. That guy's a real meanie. Oh, he totally is. Karen opened her mouth to say something more, but fell silent as she heard what sounded like squealing tires in the distance. "You don't think that's—" The screeching stopped abruptly, but then, a moment later, she heard what sounded like breaking glass. Karen dropped her fork and rose. They both faced toward the parking lot, which was hidden by the forest and the darkness. The two friends glanced at each other. Then Karen said, "I'll go check it out." "Want me to come?" "Nah." Karen grabbed the flashlight from where Tessa had left it beside the tent and switched it on. "I'll be back in a moment. Watch the sausages." Tessa poked at the splitting sausage skins as she listened to her friend march through the forest. The light from the flashlight faded before the sound of her footsteps did. Then Karen started calling, "Belle? Belle! Belle!" The night air was cooling rapidly, and Tessa snuggled closer to the fire as she waited. The logs, not quite dry enough for a calm blaze, spat and hissed as sap was cooked out of them. Karen had fallen quiet, which Tessa assumed meant she'd either found Fel or had given up. The sounds of the woods were magnified in her friend's absence. Tessa gazed at the trees as the isolation started to bite at her. The trunks, dark and rough, stretched high above their camping ground, the leaves blocking out almost all of the stars. She felt as though she'd been transported to another dimension, one without other humans. She hated the idea. Karen should be back by now, shouldn't she? She thought. Tessa checked her watch. Nearly 15 minutes had passed since her friend had left. The parking lot was nowhere near far enough away for the trip to take that long. Tessa pulled the sausages, which were so overdone they were drying out, off the fire and stood up. "Karen?" She half expected not to get a reply, but after a second Karen returned her call. "Belle?" She's still looking for her, then. Has something happened? "Belle? Belle? Belle!" "Karen?" Tessa yelled, projecting her voice as far as she could. "What's happening?" "Belle! Belle!" Tessa crossed her arms over her chest and waited. Karen's voice didn't resume, and she didn't reappear through the trees. Minutes ticked by. Tessa's anxiety rose with each passing second, until she couldn't stand it any longer. She grabbed the spare flashlight from her bag and moved into the trees. Karen was completely silent now, even when Tessa called to her. Tessa pushed through the thick bushes until she reached the open parking lot. 2 cars sat neatly at the tree's edge, Karen's and her own. A third car, small and pink, sat in the center of the clearing. It was Fel's. Skid marks ran from behind its wheels. Tessa rounded the vehicle to look in the front seat and inhaled sharply. The windshield had been smashed. The safety glass hung together in fractured clumps, but a hole pierced it. Tessa cautiously stepped closer and angled her flashlight inside. Something dark stained the driver's seat. "Phil!" Karen called from the trees behind her, and Tessa jumped away from the car. She swung around, her heart hammering, and pointed her shaking flashlight toward the trees. She thought she saw a figure about 30 paces away. The pale skin was barely visible in the darkness. She began stumbling toward it. "Karen?" Karen said something in reply, but Tessa was too far away to hear. She began moving faster, staggering through the brush and tripping over fallen trees to reach the figure. 20 paces away, she pulled up abruptly. The person in the trees wasn't Karen, or Fel. It was far too tall and lean to be either of her companions. She opened her mouth but couldn't find the words. Then the figure, without moving a muscle, said, "What is this?" It was the most surreal experience of Tessa's life. The voice was Karen's, but the body wasn't. Tessa took a step backward, and the figure said, this time in Fel's voice, "Who are you? What are you doing?" She took another step backward and bumped into something hard and cold. Tessa turned too quickly and lost her balance. She landed among the bracken in the woods floor. Raising her head, she saw another of the shapes looming over her. It was taller than a human, and its skin was so pale it almost glowed in the thin patches of moonlight that reached through the trees. Then Tessa caught sight of its face, and a scream boiled up inside her. It had no eyes or nose. The skin stretched smoothly from its tangled hair until it reached the lips, thin and blue, that framed the mouth. Its teeth were blackened and pointed, sharp enough to tear cleanly through flesh. The figure's lips opened. "What is this?" it said, imitating Karen's voice perfectly, as more of its companions melted out of the shadows to surround Tessa. "What is this?" That's where this tale ends. Stay tuned for more spooky stories coming soon.